Hi guys, welcome back. So recently, just a couple days ago, I got a job at my local hobby store as a repairman. I've been going to that store for a number of years now, and a couple days ago he just asked me if I wanted to start repairing engines for him. Of course I said yes, so I decided, since I haven't posted on this channel in a really long time, I would start a new series where I take whatever engines I'm given and try to put together some kind of guide if people have similar engines and, how to approach them, because sometimes opening up an engine is quite daunting. So, today on the workbench, we're going to be taking a look at these Proto 1000 Erie built diesels. So, without any further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, before we get into these exact engines, let's talk about what the prototype is. So, these are models of the Fairbanks Morris Erie built locomotives. Now, the Erie builts were built from 1945 through 1949, and they were designed by Fairbanks Morris. The reason I say designed and not built is because Fairbanks Morris did not have the facilities to produce such a large engine in their Wisconsin plant. So, most of the major parts on these engines were actually contracted to General Electric, which built them in Erie, Pennsylvania, hence the name Erie built locomotives. Now, these diesels were built from 1945 till 1949 and generally aren't as regarded as successful compared to the other diesels at the time. Now, Fairbanks Morris is often overshadowed by some of the bigger diesel manufacturers, being that of EMD and even Alco. And that kind of shows in their engines. Now, while extremely handsome, which anybody has to admit, these engines were plagued with problems from day one. Obviously, having somebody else build your engines for you does lead to a lot of compromises in the actual build, and many of these engines were plagued with lots of mechanical problems. Those vary from issues from the trucks to issues in the prime mover, all sorts of stuff. Now, that did not stop, however, over 90 A and B units being built in a span of 4 years. Now, these units went to the Santa Fe, Chicago Northwestern, the Milwaukee Road, which in my opinion had the best paint scheme for these. I'll throw a picture on here if I remember to. Kansas City Southern, my favorite railroad, at least New York Central, the Pennsylvania Railroad, and Union Pacific. Now, as I mentioned, there were over 90 of these units built. However, none of these survived today. One of them survived all the way up until 2010, and then it promptly got scrapped. Kind of unfortunate. However, at least we have the Proto 1000 models. Now, speaking of Proto 1000, let's talk about the manufacturing of these engines. Now, Proto created these engines in the late 90s and produced them all the way through the 2000s. Now, obviously, Proto 1000 is the less detailed series of Proto engines, 2000 being the ones with the etched metal grills and separately applied everything. However, these are still built pretty darn good. Now, all Proto engines use basically what is an exact clone of Athearn's Blue Box drive with some upgraded components, and luckily this guy is spared, to my knowledge, but some of these have really, really cracky gears. So, it's not terribly hard to start approaching these engines. Now, the two engines that we have here were given to me as non-running. You can see the note right there. And we're going to have a look at these. So, we're going to start with this guy right here. I've already taken a look at this engine, so I have a little bit of an idea of what I'm doing. So let's crack this guy open. So, this is what you get in the box with one of these engines. It looks like these engines are complete, and as is their paperwork. So, I'm going to set this beautiful thing aside for now, get back to that. This is the standard Proto 1000 manual that they get. I kind of like it. Every single one of these Proto manuals has a congratulations, as if you shouldn't be excited enough for buying an engine. They remind you with an exclamation point. Anyway, these manuals are pretty good sources. They have a parts diagram, although I doubt you can get parts for these now, and an exploded diagram of the actual mechanism. We'll get into that later on this exact engine. However, the crown gem, besides the engine itself, has to be this exclusive pamphlet for the first Proto commemorative train clock. I'm curious, does anybody actually own one of these? I didn't expect to get an advert for a clock in a train, but here it is. Obviously, this is about 20 years out of date at this point. But still, whoever buys this engine from the hobby store is going to get an exclusive chance to own the first Proto commemorative clock. So congratulations to whoever that is. I'm just gonna throw that over there. Now, all shenanigans aside, the engine itself comes in this pretty standard styrofoam package, and there's tabs in the back here, so you just push out the engine. Usually they come with some kind of plastic insert. This guy's probably missing his. And there you have it. As you can see, very, very, very handsome engine, although it becomes apparent pretty quickly that this is a Proto 1000 engine because molded on handrails and, you know, it lacks some of the bling of the 2000 lineup. Anyway, still a pretty good looking engine. So let's get it on the track and give it a test and make sure this is still an on-running engine, as the note says. Okay, so power pack's connected to the extremely old piece of brass track, and we have our engine set up there. So let's give it the power. And we get a hum, but nothing else. So let's not overstress the engine. So it is confirmed this engine does not run. Let's crack it open. So, in order to get the shell off of these Erie built engines, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is gently pry from each end. You can probably do this with a screwdriver, although these massive fuel tank tabs kind of make it a little bit easier. And watch out for the coupler, because that coupler is enclosed in the pilot. So if you feel nervous about this, feel free to remove the coupler first, but the pilot hole is big enough that you can just take the shell off. So we're going to set that thing aside for now. Sorry if this is a little bit clunky. I am doing this through the camera so you guys get a somewhat decent picture. And there you have it. So, like I said, very similar to an Athearn Blue Box drive, but this time with a rat's nest of wires. Actually, this isn't that bad. So, on top here, we have our lighting board. Now, Proto, as mentioned in the Model Railroad article from 2001, I think, reviewing these engines, they did not put a decoder plug. Instead, they have these solder pads where you can put on your own decoder. Now, nowadays, that might be a little bit of a pain because everything comes DCC ready, but back then, really not a bad option. And these engines are extremely heavy. As you can see, this entire chassis block is just solid metal. And quite a strange choice from Proto here. Exposed worm covers on both trucks. Let's get this piece of electrical tape. Yep, doesn't even stick, just kind of nasty and slimy. So we can remove that. Now, we want to access the motor because at least the way it was humming, it sounded like the motor was trying to move except something was jamming it up. So, in order to do that, we have to remove this board. Now, like I mentioned, this entire engine, unlike a Blue Box, is all wired up. So when you remove the board, just make sure to be really careful to not pull any of these wires out. It's not the end of the world if you do, you can always reattach them. But, you know, it's always good to avoid corrections if you don't make the mistake in the first place. So, there are two screws, one right here, and one right here. And then there's a tab on this side keeping the board down. So, just going to take this screw, put it in a safe place, please don't lose these. And we're going to do the same on the other side. Let's see. Alright. And now, don't lift off the board too high because it's still being attached by wires. Gently lift off the peg. And there's our motor. So, in order to test that the motor is working, since this engine is wired up, we can disconnect both drive shafts and just see if the motor runs. Now, in order to do that, you have to get off these worm covers. The easiest way to do that is to take a flat blade screwdriver, make sure it's kind of thin, and here, let me see if I can show you guys a little bit better. There'll be this little gap in between the truck and the worm, and you just want to pry it off, lift it off from both sides, and then your clip is going to come right off. Now already I can see that this is soaked in 10 times more oil than necessary, so that's going to be fun. But once that thing is off, you should be able to slide out your worm gear and drive shaft assembly. And we're going to set that aside for now. We'll come back to this a bit later. Oh, and if you're wondering of putting this, I have like a little parts tray over here, so they're not disappearing into Narnia temporarily. And we're going to do the same thing on this side here. Gently pry off the truck cover. Oops. I need to bring that one a little bit closer to see around the camera. Alright. That's truck cover number 2 off. Now, with the truck covers off, I just did this mistake again. The trucks are essentially detached from the frame except for their wires. So, unlike a blue box engine where the light bar does all the electrical pickup, these wires will get pulled if you try to yoink the truck off. Now, we're going to take off this worm gear assembly too. It doesn't really matter which worm gear assembly goes to which truck. They're identical anyway. Again, I think Proto went kind of cheap with this, making the drive shaft so thin, however it works. So you just have to match up this end link to the motor coupling that's located on the motor shaft. So we're going to set that aside for now. And as you can see, this is our engine. So, one good thing about Proto is that, as you can see, their trucks are very, very free rolling. So, now that we know that the trucks are not attached, I think... Oh, and there we go. I apologize if you can see that, but it looked like our motor was just a tad bit stuck. So, holding the trucks this time. The motor bearings appeared to be dry, and this is the same case that happened on the A unit, and that was just stalling the motor out and not giving it a chance to run. So, we can test this actually. Almost lost a screwdriver there. Let's move our shell aside and put our engine back on the track. Again, I apologize, this is clunky. I'm doing this through the camera. Oh, looks like we have got these rollers out of here. Looks like we might have a gear issue. We're gonna burn that bridge when we get there. For now, let's give it some power. And our motor is alive, albeit not very happy to be alive. But still kicking nonetheless. So, we've already... I'm going to pretend like that didn't happen. We've already established that now the trucks move freely and that our motor is free. So, we can move on to the next step, which is the actual servicing. So, although it's not necessary, just for the sake of not having our trucks fall off, I'm going to pop these clips back on, just to hold the trucks on. Again, not necessary at all, but just because I'm probably going to forget to hold the trucks up while holding this engine. Just going to pop those on for now. There we go. So now we can hold our engine and our truck stay on. So, this motor appears to have 2 points of friction. It's going to be right here in between the flywheel and the actual bearing plate there. And same thing on the other side. So, you're going to want to put just a little drop of oil right when that shaft enters that, and that's going to get rid of the friction and that slight squealing noise. So it appears like a common problem, or not really a problem because it's a design fault of the engine. When you don't put oil on your bearings and then let your engine sit for a long time, that can sometimes harden slightly and make it so that your motor stalls when you try to apply power to it. So I'm going to try to do this on camera. We're just going to put a little drop of oil right where that shaft meets. And that's one on that side. And that's one on that side. And I'm just using Lavelle 108. Industry standard, pretty good oil. Any lightweight viscosity oil should work. Please don't use WD-40, although I probably don't have to say that at this point. And now, if we put our engine back on the track, and again, the only reason why we can run the engine with the drive shafts off is because it's all hardwired, so it doesn't really matter even if the trucks are attached to the frame at this point. Give it some power. That motor sounds quite happy already. Now, I don't know how many times that engine was put under load with the bearing slightly seized, so I'm not sure about the actual health of this motor. This, of course, is an enclosed can motor, so there's no really easy way to open it and get inside. So, we're going to call the motor good. Let's move on to addressing those worm shafts. So, now that we've established that our motor is not dead and our trucks move relatively freely, let's have a look at some of the components that we removed. So, I have a paper towel on here for a reason. I don't have a dollar coin on here for a reason. So, let's have a look at one of these worm shafts. Now, if you've opened up a blue box engine, this is going to look awfully familiar. Again, this is just a standard worm shaft. It has two bearings at the end of it. You can see that here. These appear to be spinning pretty freely. They could still use some oil. So essentially, these bearings sit in little holders and allow the worm shaft to spin. So, the more friction you can reduce from these two bearings, the less resistance your total drive will have. Same thing goes for most engines that have these. So, these bearings don't look bad at all, but let's say that you had pulled out one from a blue box engine or something, and it looked absolutely disgusting. Like there was dirt and stuff everywhere. So a really easy way to clean this, however, it depends on you not losing these. So I'm going to try my best not to do that. I'm going to take one off, put it in the parts tray. Actually, you can see this one is just covered in oil, which honestly might have protected it from having the same fate as the motor bearings. And we're going to take our ominous bottle of rubbing alcohol and Plockman's Chicago Fire Mustard. We're going to put a little bit on our paper towel here. Just get a little bit on there, and we're going to clean our shaft like this. Now, again, you can still see it's taking off some old oil, but this still isn't bad at all. This will just help the bearing with new oil spin a little bit freely if there's any particles stuck in there. Now, it is possible to get this plastic sleeve off of the metal shaft, however, it's definitely not necessary to. So you can just slide this back, take your paper towel, try to clean that shaft as best as you can. And there you go. So, now we're going to take our bearing that we set safely. If I can find where I put it, that would be nice. Oh, there we go. And if the inside of your bearing is covered with crud, you can do the same method, just wad up a little bit of paper towels with some rubbing alcohol and clean it out. However, this one looks pretty good. So we're going to take a little bit of lightweight viscosity oil. And again, you don't want to use any grease or something here because that'll actually add a little bit more resistance. And just put a little drop on your shaft. Take your bearing, spin it back on there, and you should instantly feel that it spins quite a bit freely. Same process over here, except again, we don't take the bearing off. Just put a little bit of oil on the shaft and spin that bearing around, get it coated pretty good all through there. And that's pretty much all you have to do to these guys. So I'm going to repeat this on the other one, and then I'll show you guys how to put them back in, although it should be pretty self-explanatory at this point. So now we're going to go over how to put the drive shafts back. If you're like me and you put the cover on, you're just going to want to take that off. Again, use the same method, flathead screwdriver, gently pry it off both sides, should come off pretty easily. Now, as I mentioned, the motor has a coupling on it right by the flywheel. It's actually identical to an Athearn coupling. And I'm going to do this off camera because I don't want to pull any wires or anything, but this end of your shaft will only fit in one way into the coupling. It's pretty easy to see it. If you look at the coupling, there'll be a groove. This just fits right into the groove like this. And then your ball bearings are just going to sit down in the allocated space. So I'm going to go ahead and do this right now. And there's the click. And I'm going to make sure that my other wire is on the opposite side, just to make things a little bit neater. And there we go. And then you're going to see that there's two spaces. Let me pan this down a little bit. Right here and here. And you're just going to want with the screwdriver to rotate both of your bearings to be flat. Line them up. And you'll feel them click. And they're just going to sit down right like that. So, before anything moves, take your truck cover. Again, thread it. Actually, yeah, don't need to pull that light out. Thread it through the jungle of wires here. And just clip it down like that. So that's what you're going to do to put the drive shafts back in the truck. And just to check it, you're going to feel, one, the top part click, and you're also going to feel if you can't spin the wheels freely anymore because there's a worm gear engaged. So you're going to do the same thing to the back truck, and then I can show you guys how to open up the bottom trucks in case you need to service those. Alright, and now that both of our drive shafts are installed, we can do a quick track test. Now again, now that both of the trucks were free to begin with, and now that our motor is free, again I do apologize, this is clunky, I'm doing this behind a camera. Let's pan that up, and give her some power, and there we go. Now of course my test track is only that long, so we won't get her going too fast here. We'll take her over to the layout a little bit later, but first, can't forget to put those two screws back on for a board. So again, you just kind of work in this one tab in this corner, then line up your holes. Grab your two screws from the beginning. Let me turn off the transformer first so you don't hear humming in the background. That's magnetic screwdrivers are excellent for this, but even that can't save a tiny screw. Clumsy fingers. So that's one of them. And that's the other one right there. Now, as you saw, this engine runs, and honestly all it needs is some grease, but let's say that yours doesn't. Let's say that one of your trucks were jammed. Then what do? Well, it's not terribly hard, and again, all you have to do is remove this bottom plate cover. Now there are two sets of tabs on both sides, and the exploded parts diagram will give you a much better picture of how to do this. But all you have to do is remove these two truck covers, and both of your axles, or all of your axles, will be able to pop right out. Now, as far as I know, these Erie builds don't have the notorious gear cracking problem that some of the Proto Jeeps have, especially, and their FAs, and sometimes their E-units. These should be relatively free, but in case you do have cracked gears, I am pretty sure that you can get parts for them. Again, I don't have a parts number for you, unfortunately, but a quick internet search should yield you some luck in that regard. Now, in terms of actually greasing these engines up, because we do have two towers up here, it's easiest to do this with Labelle 106 or some kind of slightly higher medium viscosity lubricant. So again, you don't want to overdo this, but you want to just put a little bit right on the worm gear. That'll work itself in. Same thing on the front truck. Let's see if my camera will focus. There we go. And again, Not an exorbitant amount, but just enough to get a little bit on there. Right, and now I have the engine up on rollers just to verify that this thing runs before we put the shell on and take it over to the track. There we go. Now this is bare track on wood, so this is going to be a lot noisier than how it would operate on any type of roadbed. So keep that in mind. However, engine seems to be running pretty good. So there's the reading on our trusty auto pulse. And if we take a look, we do our headlights. And there you have it. That's basically all for a simple service on one of these Proto 1000 engines. Overall, I quite like these engines. My opinion on Proto has changed quite a bit after doing a couple of them. These are pretty decently well built. These engines, both of them, actually the A unit too, or I say A unit, I mean just A, had the exact same problem as this guy too. It was just the motor bearings that had gotten a little bit stuck up. Everything else is really nice about these engines. Obviously the look is very unique to these Erie builds. It almost looks like a PA and a C-liner, the product of a PA and a C-liner. Overall, pretty well detailed as well. Again, nothing over the top like Proto 2000 does, none of your opening doors or anything like that. But overall, for a first generation diesel, this is a very solid model of one.